You can see my slides. One of you can kindly acknowledge.
Yes, sir, we can see.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So basically, this module is how do we use data and how do we use perhaps some first principles knowledge to be able to make sure that we monitor our assets. When we say assets, all of our manufacturing systems are our assets, be it the oil and gas, be it chemical plants, be it mechanical engineering assembly lines, be it electrical power generation systems. All of these are assets. And what we want to be able to do is use them in a way that keeps them in top performance condition, make sure that they are always delivering in top performance conditions. So basically monitor their performance and assess their performance, monitor their performance. These are two different things. Monitoring the performance is the first step towards ensuring that you are basically sweating out the assets, making sure that they are performing at their peak. But assessment is basically an explicit activity where you are continuously looking at comparing that performance, the current performance with the benchmark, and be able to push the operation as close to the benchmark as possible. So performance monitoring and assessment is what we are talking about. Plant, basically assets, and also control. See, why I'm using the word control here is because controllers are basically vehicles or instruments that essentially help us to monitor or to keep the performance on track. And so the controller's health itself must also be very carefully monitored and it also be assessed to be performing closest to the benchmark as possible, as close as possible. And so this module is titled Control and Plant Performance Monitoring and Assessment. So let's look at some basic definitions and scope. When we are talking of performance monitoring, we are talking of continuous and real-time survey of some of the critical plant variables that determine plant performance. So what is performance now? When you talk of performance, the first thing, of course, you want to make sure is safety, safe performance. Second, you want to make sure that it's optimal performance, right? So when you're doing real-time survey, you're basically collecting critical plant variables and you're looking at them. I'll just call you back in a short while. Namaste. Online course is going on. So I will call you. I'll call you in a short while. Yeah. So, we are talking of basically some critical assets, which, just 1 minute, and controllers. Just a minute, please. Yeah. So here what we are doing is critical plant variables that determine plant performance. You just do a survey of those. And then when you're doing performance assessment, we are basically looking at evaluating the performance on a continuous basis and its comparison with some kind of a benchmark. So evaluation of a representative index of plant performance, then depending on the consolidated values of the parameter profiles, whatever we choose here, highlight the performance relative to the benchmark, which is the best known or the best achievable performance. You want to make sure that you highlight the performance related to that. Assess and diagnose reasons for suboptimal performance, and then suggest potential remedial measures for performance. So assessment is a fairly involved task, which not only incorporates monitoring as a first step, but also goes ahead to compare the performance, assess, diagnose reasons for suboptimal performance, and then suggest potential remedial measures. So all of these are just as critical to make sure that your assets are performing at their peak operating point. Okay. Now, before we go further, I just want to look at variability as a performance measure, because typically nobody likes variability. Right? You want your outputs, your plant outputs, let's say your energy, your polymers, if you're making polymers, your quality, your manufacturing lines, your assembly lines, your the quality of your cars that you make or product parts that you make, you want them to be at peak quality or at the right desired quality. Variation from that quality is certainly not acceptable, right? So variability is typically a pain point and you want it to be as narrow as possible. So it's perhaps a good idea to use that as a performance measure. There can of course be several, cost can be a performance measure, a balanced aspect of cost and variability could be a performance measure. But generally, variability is the key. Once you have variability narrow, everything else becomes, falls in place. So you want to make sure that you keep the variability as low as possible. Now, variability essentially means two things here, as you can see in the two sub-bullet points. Variability from what? Variability from the targets. Is the target specified in a systematic and optimal manner? That's the first question that you ask. Many times what happens is that you specify a target based on a model. And the model itself is not accurate. So now, what are we talking about in terms of variability then? Okay. So first is make sure that, and now there is this drive in the industry, especially 4.0, 5.0, we're talking of the notion of a digital twin. So what we want to be able to do is continuously look at plant data, continuously look at your models, make sure that your model is indeed a digital twin of your plant. Then determine targets based on the model and then specify them to be your targets for your actual operations. So when you do that, you are able to, first of all, specify more realistic and optimal targets. And second bullet point is attainment of these targets. These needs to be consistently driven. You have to have basically a scheme where all variability from that specified target is minimized no matter what. Okay? And that's where controllers become very, very important, because you have a set point and you make sure that the outputs adhere to the set point. So that attainment is consistently driven by controllers, but also controllers are basically at the lower levels of decision making. As you go up, the PID level, the MPC level or the dynamic optimization level, the real-time optimization level, the scheduling level. As you go towards these higher levels of decision making, this hierarchical or peer-to-peer structure that I mentioned in bullet point 2 of decision making also needs to make sure that targets are specified realistically and attainment are consistently driven. Okay. So when we are talking of variability now, you want to basically narrow down variability. So let's go back to the previous slide. In the previous slide, we said highlight performance relative to the best known or achievable performance. And variability is one such performance. When it is narrow, it is probably one of the best known or achievable performance. But how do you know that this variability cannot be narrowed even further, right? So when best known doesn't mean that there is no other operation that can be better. It's only best known, but there might as well be in the domain, there can be some unknown, as yet unknown region where the plant has navigated, but that has a superior performance. Okay. So what we want to be able to do is use this digital twin to be able to specify targets as well as possible. Okay. Which means what you want to make sure that is your digital twin is current. You want to be able to provide benchmarks that are achievable, but also, you want to make sure that you have a really, really aggressive benchmark, because if you keep a relatively relaxed benchmark, then you're not really achieving optimal performance. So make sure that the benchmark is very, very high, and also your other mechanisms to drive the performance close to the benchmark are also consistently implemented. So now let's come to the first asset, which actually drives the objective of minimizing variability. So controllers, for example, controllers, multivariable controllers, assuming that the targets are specified well, you want to make sure there is some problem in this block diagram. There has to be feedback. This line somehow have gotten vertical. They should be horizontal, going from here and feedback. So controllers basically drive the output, the process output, as close to the target as possible, and you want to minimize variability using controllers. Now, to be able to do this, the health of the controller must be. It's like a doctor, which makes sure that the process is operating well. But then, who monitors the health of the doctor itself? You want to make sure that the doctor is also healthy, right? So, if you look at what's the definition of control, it is transferring variability from a point where it hurts the most, which is here, to a point where it hurts the least, which is here. And controllers do that task. You want to make sure that this is driven in a consistent manner. I think we have spent, most of you must already be aware of this, that there is a control hierarchy to minimize variability. The variability reduction is achieved at each of these scales. At the fastest scale here in the order of seconds, minutes, hours, days. Okay? Normally, as we know, this is Sharad, I'm in a session. Yeah, please go ahead. You'll join my WebEx link. Okay, I just targeted it to be at up to 11 o'clock. So I don't think it should be a problem. I'll keep it on and you can join. Right, I'll do that. Sharad. Yeah. Okay, thank you. So basically, the target setting is downwards, but also unachieved targets is escalated back to the upper layers. Okay, so the top-down hierarchy is in terms of optimality in decision making, whereas in recent architectures there is also peer-to-peer to promote coordinated achievement of the optimality. So this is generally the control hierarchy, and you want to make sure that this functions well. So controllers then become vital assets for implementing those optimal decisions. What we want to be able to do is you want to make sure that their health is very good. They are performing well even in the presence of several factors that could affect their performance. For instance, unforeseen disturbances, unmodeled dynamics, slowly changing plant characteristics. Plant characteristics may vary. So a controller is supposed to be an inverse of the plant. But when the plant dynamics change, we normally don't change the controller. You want to make sure that the controller is also updated to be able to, be a true inverse of the plant dynamics. When you implement it, there can be friction in walls, there can be actuator biases, and so on. So, given this, there can be an error in performance or a variation in performance. Likewise, sensor drifts, missing observations, all of these can affect the control loop performance monitoring. So what you want to be able to do is you want to be able to monitor this health of this control loop, and then make sure that you drive it as close to its peak health as possible. So now this motivates the need for monitoring that control loop. So some statistics is in order. There was a survey done in 2003. Some of you may already be familiar with this. They looked at a variety of loops that are present in the process industry, the chemical process industry. Okay? So, for example, 32% of the controllers were flow, 15% was pressure, 18% was level, temperature was 20%. Now, given this kind of a demographics, it turned out on the right-hand side, you see that only a quarter, 1/4 of them are at peak operating performance. A massive 1/3 is good, 32% is fair, and 10% is poor. If you look at a survey of 8,500 loops. Okay? This is generally the situation in most operating plants as well, that only a quarter of them operated their peak performance. What this means is that the variability is not minimized. What this also means is that the adherence to target becomes problem, so optimality is compromised. Okay? This is probably something that makes a need for an online performance monitoring system. Okay. There is one more aspect. Increasingly plants are getting automated as you go to Industry 4.0, 5.0, and the like. There is a wish list and so on. There is an emphasis on reducing the role of humans in the loop because most of the errors, accidents happen because of the presence of humans, and you want to build a high reliable, high integrity system to that works well. Now, personally, I am not in favor of this because no matter how smart a machine is, somewhere human has to be in the loop. But anyway, given that there is an emphasis on reducing operators in process plants, this is another compelling reason why one needs to continuously monitor the health of the controller itself, because controller makes sure that the targets are adhered to. If the controller's health is not good, then you have a problem. So you want to make sure that you look at all of the data in control loops and be able to make sense out of it so that you can improve the health of the controller. Okay. Now, some other controller statistics, more than 90% of the field level controllers are PI or PIDs. More than 30% of the PIDs actually operate in manual. This is because the operators don't understand why the controllers are taking those actions. Okay. More than 30% of the loops actually increase short-term variability. Rather, controllers are intended to narrow down variability, but more than 30% of the loops actually increase short-term variability. Okay, and the reason for this is because 25% of the loops use default settings that are there when it comes from the factory, and nobody has bothered to tune them. 30% of the loops have equipment problems associated with balls, maybe sensors and the like. And then, when this is a situation where you have significant number of loops that actually increase variability, then higher levels of decision making like APC, real-time optimization, the escalation back becomes more frequent than what is required. The escalation that I talked about in this slide, the arrows that go up to the higher decision making, which convey infeasibility or unachieved targets, those signals become quite large in number, and thereby the load on the higher levels of decision making becomes much more problematic. So you want to make sure that the health of the controllers, no matter where it is in the hierarchy, is really at its peak. Now, performance assessment. Performance assessment goes one step further. What you want to do, you look at the performance monitoring, and then now you say, okay, here is how the output variable is behaving. The question is the controller doing a satisfactory job? You might think that I might just draw a mean here, and so long as it is around in and around the mean, okay, fine, it's doing a decent job. Can't say that by visual eyeballing. Maybe you might go in and do an MSc, but that alone is not important. You also need to compare that MSc with what is the benchmark. There can be regions of operation when this variation is much narrower and the variance will be smaller, and so that can be a benchmark. Or how do you know that that smaller benchmark is smaller variance is something that's seen? How do you know that there is another variance that is achievable but it has not been seen? If you don't suggest that as a benchmark, then you're not actually driving your controllers and your process. So what you want to be able to do is look at what is the best achievable control. What is the best achievable control? One is best seen performance. But how do you know you cannot exceed that? You can actually exceed that performance. So then the best achievable performance must be theoretical. Theoretical based on what? Based on the controller itself and the plant dynamics. Okay. Now, one such benchmark is suggested as the minimum variance controller. A minimum variance controller is a theoretical benchmark that is arrived at from the model of the process and from the type of the controller. Now, when you look at the minimum variance benchmark, oftentimes it is just not achievable, but at least it's an absolute benchmark, which is, can be approached, it can never be reached, but so be it, At least there is a benchmark which is much, much higher, and you can, hope to reach it. It's like, I'll give you two examples from pedagogy. I can say that, when I did my BTech, there was one student who was an outlier. Outlier because he was All India rank 1 in JEE. And, he would, his performance was even in the most toughest of the exams. If the exam was out of 20, he would be the one who would get 18 or 19 out of 20. And the other students, the next set of students would start somewhere at 5, 3, 2, and some of them would actually get negative marks. Okay, now this student is an absolute benchmark because that benchmark cannot be achieved. So he's just too brilliant. He's just too smart. In fact, I remember that once there was a very tough exam on a Monday morning, and this student actually went to Nagpur to play a chess tournament. And he came back over the weekend traveling in the train. And then in the night, he probably must have studied. He walked into our convocation hall to give the exam at 8:30 a.m. and he maxed it out. He got the highest marks again. Now, how he did that is superhuman. But nevertheless, what we're talking about here is a theoretical benchmark, which is really so high that you can aspire to reach there. You may not reach there, but you can aspire to reach there. The best achievable control is one such benchmark. The other is a user-specified benchmark. For example, some people may have relaxed aspirations. They might say that so long as whatever is my closed loop time constant, if that is reached, I am happy. I don't want to worry about narrowing down the variation. So you can then have user-specified benchmarks. But nevertheless, when you're talking of this assessment, you monitor the performance and go one step ahead to compare that performance with a benchmark, find out what are the bad actors that have not contributed to that benchmark and drive them in a way that tries to push you as close to the benchmark as possible, right? So this performance assessment can be done not only with respect to controllers, but even with respect to operating plants. Okay, we have done that as a parallel activity when we looked at the pharma batches. In a pharma batch, a pharma batch has to achieve a high quality in a short time because it's a batch process. And when you do that, you want to monitor the performance in such a way that a best known or what's called as a golden batch in the industry, that golden batch is followed very closely as possible. But how do you know that a golden batch is really the best batch? How do you know that there is no better batch? If you want to specify a better batch as a target, then you need a model of the process which is as close to the operation as possible, and run your optimizer and find out what is the best achievable performance and specify that as a benchmark. It may or may not be achievable, but at least there is some benchmark that helps you to track your performance related to that. Okay? So now what we are talking about here is how does tracking this benchmark help you? Okay. So if you see, this is the constraint. Okay, operating close to the constraint is actually helping. And the example that I gave you yesterday, high purity distillation and ppm levels of 1000. In this case, let's assume that it's about 55. Now, operating close to it will save a huge amount of energy, but you don't want to violate that constraint because then quality suffers. So what operators do typically, they operate substantially away from that benchmark because the controller is not doing a good job in terms of its variance. So if you were able to look at the controller during this region and narrow down that variance, you see that this variance is much, much narrower and you are able to push the operation closer to the benchmark, resulting in a huge amount of energy. So this is that opportunity that we are talking about when we try to reduce variance, which translates into money, as you saw, energy savings and the like. Likewise, if I were to look at this operation and look at the standard deviation, it would give me a histogram that looks like this, a density function that looks like this, whereas here it looks like much, much narrower. And so I would like to narrow down the variance. So minimum variance seems to be a good benchmark to opt for or set as a benchmark so that we want to be as close to the minimum benchmark as possible. and a ratio of the minimum variance controller, sigma square MVC, divided by sigma square present. See, at the moment this goes closer to this, the current performance goes closer to the minimum variance benchmark, this ratio will go to 1. Now, if it is not close to the benchmark, this variance is only going to be larger, and so this eta is going to be less than 1. Okay. So this seems to be a good performance index to choose so that you are able to track the performance relative to the benchmark and try to push it as close to the benchmark as possible. So this is one of the benchmarks that has been suggested in research and also being practiced in the industry. Okay. I think I've talked about this, so let's not worry about this slide. What we're trying to do is we're trying to push it as close to the quality spec as possible. Okay. So with that preamble, let's look at how do you monitor control loops. Okay. First, you do a data collection, obviously, performance index estimation. Then you define the benchmarks, right? Minimum variance is a benchmark. What does it really mean? Okay. Then you assess and detect the reasons for why the operation is not as close to the benchmark as possible. And then you diagnose for performance degradation and look at remedial measures. I'll quickly browse through these 5 steps. Obviously, how do you determine the first step, data collection, performance index estimation? You essentially look at the variance. And as we all know, you collect routine loop data, estimate the variance, get this variance by this definition. But by itself, as I said, it does not provide a measure of performance. We need a yardstick or a metric to compare this number with a benchmark so that we are able to place it relative to the best known performance. Okay. So actual estimated variance is this. Benchmark or the lowest achievable variance is this. One measure of performance is this, and this gives you a continuum between 0 and 1, because the moment this becomes closer to this, the measure of performance is 1. As variance becomes larger, this becomes less than 1. Okay. So then how does one estimate the benchmark variance? So this benchmark variance, how does one estimate it? Okay. Now, benchmark variance could be the variance achieved by the best controller. Now, this may or may not be achievable. We want to make sure that we see that caveat there, that the minimum best controller, theoretically, when we specify the minimum variance controller, this is the best controller for that plant, but it is not necessarily achievable. Okay. What does minimum variance controller do? Let me go back here. Okay. This definition that we talked about here of transferring variability from a point where it hurts the most to a point where it hurts the least. So there is variation here in the output Y. It gets transferred to the inputs U. Okay. Now, what does minimum variance benchmark say? Minimum variance benchmark says push this variance to be as small as possible. What does that mean? That means that this variation becomes as large as possible. And many times what happens is, because of constraints on walls or actuators, that variation as large as possible in U may not be implementable. There can be saturation in the actuators. Okay? So the best known variance is not achievable. The minimum variance controller, I've generically used generic term I've used as a multivariable controller. But when this becomes a minimum variance controller, the action that it predicts is actually not implementable. Okay? But it still calculates what is the best way to minimize variance. And so we go to this aspect that, it is theoretically the best controller, but it's not necessarily achievable. Okay, and we'll see what this is. Somewhere this hyperlink is lost, but we'll see. User specified. So one is the minimum variance controller. User specified benchmarks in terms of closed loop specification. I talked about the relaxed operator. He says he doesn't care about variance. He just wants to make sure that the time constant is adhered to. Or it can be the best observed variance. This is what industry seems to prefer because they're comfortable. But if you look at the higher levels of decision making, they say that the best observed need not necessarily be the best achievable. The best achievable can be even better. And so one could specify the minimum variance benchmark as the best benchmark. There could be other metrics also. For example, service factor, how much time an advanced controller is up and running, operational performance efficiency. You can look at energy usage and see how good is the efficiency. Weighted combination of other operational indices. So the other operational metrics could also be used. But what if you look at it from a purist viewpoint is that minimum variance controller will be the best. A practical benchmark would be the best observed variance. The next benchmark would be closed loop specifications. And then we could look at all of these aspects. Okay? Now, as a compromise in research, there is also this aspect called generalized minimum variance. What generalized minimum variance does is it accommodates the constraints on the use and then says what is the best achievable performance. That also is, some kind of a passe, if you will, from the theoretically best minimum variance controller, but at least one can accept generalized minimum variance control. Okay. So the question is now, how do you interpret this? Okay, this is very well known. If the performance is here, it is green. If the performance is here, then there is a definite potential in improving the current performance. You look at what are the bad actors. Could require controller retuning, change in controller configuration, process redesign. I mean, that's a much advanced step, but also reconfiguration, controller reconfiguration, or a combination of all of this. Okay? If it is somewhere here, further reduction in output variance is not possible by retuning the existing controller. And so basically engineer and operator knowledge is extremely helpful in interpreting how you can improve the performance and how you can consistently drive it to be as close to one as possible. So now, what does the monitoring task involve? Just collect routine operating data. Okay, look at issue out alarms if it violates that, and then look at now. Mind you, here this is the lower limit. If it falls below, then that's an alarm. The normal way we see control limit is, statistical limits is that if it violates on the upper side or the lower side. Here, only the lower side. If the performance index drops below a threshold, then that's not acceptable. Okay. Then try to isolate the problem. Disturbances. Is it because of that? Is it because of controller tuning? Is it because of the plant? What are the others? So you can basically have three metrics of excellent performance when it is somewhere here, good performance when it is somewhere here, poor performance when it is somewhere here, and this is kind of a continuum between 0 and 1 that you can establish when you're doing this monitoring task. Okay. Must complete this. Okay. Now there are other approaches that also look at the frequency domain. Okay. Now why is this important? Why is the frequency domain important? Remember that when you're talking of implementing control loops, it is very, very rare that you don't have oscillations. Oscillations are very, very common. Okay. The moment you talk of oscillations, those oscillations can be at different frequencies. And therefore, an analysis in the frequency domain can also be done to basically look at minimum variance spectrum, minimum variance controller spectrum, and the actual observed minimum, the frequency power spectrum in the current operation, and basically then be able to say whether controllers increase variability, they decrease variability, and all of that, because this what we are now using is Parseval's theorem to transform time domain data into frequency domain. I hope all of you are familiar with Parseval's theorem. Basically, it's an approach to basically frequency domain approach, or a connecting the frequency domain to the time domain kind of approach, which looks at the power spectrum, and the total area under the minimum variance power spectrum curve should be lower than the output power spectrum. If this is the case, then we are sure that the performance is good. So one could also look at it in the frequency domain. There is a lot of work being done in literature to look at spectral methods for performance assessment. But let's not spend time on this as part of this talk. We'll essentially look at some time domain data. Now here is one such example taken from Huang et al., which looks at an industrial process. Okay, this is one, to my recollection, this is basically a nitric acid manufacture starting from ammonia oxidation, and basically it's on a catalyst. And when you look at this process, you want to make sure that the catalyst health is preserved. Okay, so this temperature control loop is something that was chosen for evaluation, and here was the data. The data looked like this, quite a bit of variation. The question that was asked was, how good a job are we doing in regulating this temperature, and can we do any better? Can this variance be reduced by retuning this loop? Okay, and the answers were, the performance index during that time, this time was in the range of 0.2 and lower. Okay, whereas when the loop was just simple retuning was done of the loop, the performance index increased to about 0.4, okay, relative to a scale of 1. And what did this do? This obviously narrowed down the oscillations, but this tighter temperature regulation resulted in a 22% increase in catalyst life. Remember that catalysts are very sensitive to temperatures, and sintering can happen, their activity can be lost. So the moment you regulate the temperature more tightly, it resulted in a 22% increase in catalyst in an industrial case study. Okay? In another benzene toluene xylene plant, there is a plant-wide audit done for, you see what you see here are each of those plant tags. Okay, and you can look at the variation, but when you look at if you want to eyeball so many tags, it's not possible. So what you do is you look at the establishing the minimum variance benchmark. You look at the current variance related to the minimum variance benchmark, take the ratio, and set it to be equal to um, plot it along as a function of all the tags, and you find that some of the controllers are actually performing much below par. Some of them are performing really well, and so on. So this becomes a good measure to monitor the control loop health. And then I didn't mention this. When you are looking at the frequency domain and the power spectrum, you are basically trying to monitor and diagnose which is the bad actor. If there are, let's say, the operation is fairly linear and the frequencies basically can be tracked, which of the variables have the same frequency content, all of those must be correlated with each other, because that's where the uh, sync is there between, they're all in synchronization, so they must be correlated in some way. If you go and query those set of variables, you might be able to diagnose what is the root cause. It could be, for example, a badly performing valve and the like. So that kind of a diagnostics can also be performed using in the frequency domain. Okay, so let me just pause here for some questions and then come back. Any questions up to this point, please? Any questions? Okay, it's been fairly straightforward up to now, not too many advanced concepts. Can you see my screen now? I think I stopped sharing, so maybe I should start sharing. Yeah. So what we next do is we try to diagnose what are the reasons for performance degradation, and there can be several of those. Control performance could degrade due to a variety of reasons. The first, of course, is the plant model mismatch. And those of you who work in the control area would know that if your controller is not
the design is based on a model that is as close to the plant as possible. If the plant dynamics change with respect to time, then there is a model plant mismatch introduced, and therefore controller does not perform well. There could be non-linearities. The region of operation of the plant has moved from one region to another, that might bring in non-linearity. Or there could be a valve stiction that can be a reason for the non-linearity. There could be oscillatory behavior resulting from an incorrect controller tuning, the one that you saw for the industrial case study for nitric acid. That is a case in point. Incorrect controller tuning, because of which oscillatory behavior was. Incorrect configuration leading to interactions. Many times what happens when you do cascade control and the like, you want to make sure that you configure the cascade loops in a correct manner, otherwise it will lead to interactions. So that's something also you can try to diagnose. There could be time varying disturbances. So you need to diagnose amongst these possible causes and provide an advisory to plant operators to take remedial measures. Okay? So how do you do this? Now let's look at them one by one. Model plant mismatch diagnosis. Controller performance is affected by model quality. So you want to be able to detect the mismatch. You need to assess the need for re-identification. Okay, that is, update the model only if necessary, and then monitor the performance after assessment. So this is a body of work in our research group in IIT Bombay under Professor. The student was Abhijit Badwe, who worked jointly with me and Professor Sachin Patwardhan. Now this basically is the plant. This is the model of the plant. This is the controller. What you want to be able to do is continuously make sure that the model is as close to the plant as possible, which means you have to monitor this error signal. Because if you see, this E is the mismatch times U plus noise that comes here. This delta is the mismatch. U is the mismatch times U plus V is the signal here. You essentially want to look at whether G hat is close to G by monitoring this E. Okay, so many times what happens if you just look at the correlation between E and U, assuming V is white noise. If E and U correlation is white, then you know that there's not a whole lot that you can do, and you have to live with it. But if not, then a correlation analysis between the internal signals E and U can tell us what's the extent of the mismatch. But this is generally not true for the multivariable case. So just a simple correlation analysis would not work, simply because in a multivariable case, this is a multivariable controller. And if I have a multivariable controller, then this correlation can show up in a incorrect manner as well. I mean, it can be a spurious correlation can show up, as we'll just see in a short while. Okay. So here is one such example. I have 7 controlled variables and 3 manipulated variables. Okay. This becomes a large matrix of transfer functions, which essentially need to be, whose health or whose accuracy needs to be monitored very closely. Okay. You want to make sure that significantly bad models are highlighted based on some kind of an analysis. So what is done? You look at the error residuals and you write down all of the error residuals for each of the n output variables as a function of each of the m input variables. Okay. So if you look at a correlation between E1 and U1, it might detect. Yes. Let me pause. There is a nice question here. Let me look at that question. So Nirmala Devi said that, could you please tell us equation for the multivariable model? Okay. Okay. So let me share the slide. See, the multivariable model, G hat is a matrix of transfer functions. In practice, it will look like this. Each of these are transfer functions. Okay. And in the industrial plant, this will consist of a first order plus time delay model.
The slide is not visible.
Oh, I see. Okay, I'm so sorry. Okay. Yeah. So, when you're talking of G hat is a model which is basically a transfer function, a matrix of transfer functions that will typically look like this. The transfer function between MV1 and CV1 will come here with MV2 and so on. So this is a 7-row, 3-column matrix of transfer functions, which is the relationship between an input and an output in a multivariable case. Does that help answer your question, Dr. Nirmala Devi?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Yeah. And what we want to be able to do is, if either in those transfer function, if there are any parameters in the transfer function that are not accurately representative of the plant, you want to be able to detect that and say that this needs updation, or this needs updation, or this needs updation. The question is, how do you detect which of the transfer functions need an updation, right? So
Yes.
one way is you can look at the correlation between the errors E1 and each of the U's, okay, and that might indicate the presence of a mismatch in the channel. For example, if there is a significant correlation between E1 and U1, what you do is you do a simple correlation analysis and see if delta is large. Delta 11 is large, then you have to update that, or delta 12 is large. Now, this will indicate mismatch, but the problem is that, what happened here? I don't know what happened here. Okay, let me see if I can show that to you. Yeah, there is some animation here that has not worked well. Sorry about that. But basically, what happens is, if there is a correlation between the variables, okay, if there is a correlation between the variables, as you can see here, if there is a correlation, meaning that, see, each of these U's are emerging from the same controller, and they can be correlated amongst themselves. So if you just do a simple correlation analysis, that might indicate the existence of a model plant mismatch even when there is not one, if you do a simple correlation analysis. And so what one needs to do is one needs to do something called as a partial correlation analysis. In a partial correlation analysis, what happens is it takes care of the fact that when the variables across which you are testing the correlation, if they themselves are correlated, then it suppresses that correlation and gives you a more clearer indication of a significant mismatch. And so this is something that we tried for a example problem in this as a shell control problem, and here it was able to detect. Just quickly go to the results. There was a 10% gain mismatch added in the time constant in channel U1, Y1, and the challenge was to kind of, I'll come back to you, Senthil. Was to detect the mismatch, and so it was seen that in the regular correlation plots, the significant partial correlation. So this is the regular correlation plot. The regular correlation plot does not indicate that the mismatch is only in channel U1, Y1. Whereas when you do a partial correlation, it keeps all other correlations under control, but it only shows you that the mismatch is present, significant mismatch is present in the U1, Y1. Okay, so when you are doing this kind of an analysis, you are basically looking at the sequences of E1 and all the E's and all the U's, and you are essentially doing a partial correlation among them to highlight the ones that are really significant, and spurious correlations are basically suppressed. Okay, so we applied this also to an industrial case study, the kerosene hydrotreater unit at Sencor Energy. In fact, the student Abhijit Badwe, he spent some time with this industry as part of his PhD, and there the problem was also similar, that something has happened to the slide deck. We are missing some. So before I post it, I'll make sure that they are correct. But basically, regular correlations again there did not show unambiguously that there is a mismatch, whereas partial correlations were able to detect the channels in which the mismatch existed. Okay, so in general, when you are trying to do this kind of an analysis, for any system, when you're trying to find out the root cause and the like, just going back here, when you're doing this kind of an analysis, you want to make sure that you highlight only those that are realistic and correct, and spurious correlations are not thrown up. For example, here, since U1 and U2 emanate from the same controller, they are correlated amongst themselves. Okay, the mismatch may exist only in delta 11 and not in delta 12, but because U1 and U2 are correlated with each other, U2 will also show up, delta 12 will also show up as something that has a mismatch, which is not a correct interpretation. When you do a partial correlation analysis to test the relationship between E1 U1 and E1 U2, the partial correlation will clearly indicate that this is not a channel in which mismatch exists. It's only this that mismatch exists. Okay? So that's where you want to be able to use the correlation analysis in a careful manner. Okay? Just 1 minute, please. Just give me a minute, please. Okay, so I hope this idea is clear. Partial correlation analysis. If you really want to test the correlation between any two signals, if there are a third set of signals that are correlated as well with the signal across which you're trying to test the correlation, then it might confound your findings. Whereas a partial correlations will give you an unambiguous indication of whether a correlation exists or not between various signals. Okay, particularly true in the control loop performance case. In fact, Abhilasha has applied this quite effectively for water distribution networks when there are correlations. She has applied partial correlation analysis to isolate the channels in which there is grouping that is necessary and to suppress the effect of any possible interactions and the like. So the second reason why performance can degrade. Okay, I have to answer one other question here. I think somebody posed a question. Can you please ask that question? It becomes difficult for me to switch between. Can you ask that question, the one who posed that question? Okay, I think I saw a question here. Relative gain array can help the mismatch. No. Relative gain array is for a different reason, Swapna. A relative gain array is basically to find the pairing for control loops. Okay. But when you're doing mismatch detection, you want to find out those channels in which the dynamics is no longer representative. The model is no longer representative of the planned dynamics. So for that, you want to do an error analysis like we saw. We looked at the error signal between the model predictions and the plant output and the model predictions, and try to test for a correlation between that error and the input for each channel. Okay, and if that correlation is significant for a single input, single output case, if that error is significant, then we know that the model plant mismatch is there. But for a multivariable case, just a regular correlation will not work. We'll have to do a partial correlation. That was the message that I was trying to get across. Because each of the inputs also amongst themselves are correlated. And so if you test for a correlation between E1 and U1, it might show an existence because of the mismatch, but it will also show you that there is a mismatch between E1 and U2 simply because U1 and U2 are correlated among themselves. So if you want to get an unambiguous representation of where the mismatch exists, then correlation does not help. Partial correlations will help. Okay.
Okay, sir.
Yeah. And then we looked at we look at another reason for diagnosis of performance degradation, which is the nonlinearity. If I have nonlinearity in the plant, then obviously a linear controller may not perform well. Okay. So what you want to be able to do is detect the nonlinearities. Now in machine learning and related research, there is this higher order statistics that has increasingly come up. Bicoherence, no, this should not be coherence. Coherence is a linearity measure. This is bispectrum and bicoherence. Okay. So higher order statistics, bispectrum. Here we are talking of bispectrum and bicoherence. These can be used to detect the presence of nonlinearities. Okay. Control loop signals can be assessed for non-Gaussianity using these measures, and then those could highlight the presence of nonlinearities and so on. There could be incorrect configurations leading to interactions. For example, how do you detect the presence of interactions? When I have large control loops, power systems, in fact, water distribution networks, the research that Abhilasha has done recently, you essentially want to look at, does the interaction help? Does the interaction hurt? And can we accommodate the presence of interactions when we are doing control loop performance monitoring? So here is one example in a process system where there can be interactions. If you see this fluidized catalytic cracking unit in a large refinery, just to give you a sense of the scale of these operations, we are looking at the reactor, the regenerator, which are two large reactors by themselves. There is also a distillation column, and this is a huge plant. Okay. Now, what one could do is treat the reactor recycle as one unit, and just treat reactor as one unit and the regenerator as another unit, and so on. So you could do decompositions. When you do decompositions, as opposed to this centralized large treatment, this large multivariable controller can be implemented, but people prefer to go decentralized. So when you go decentralized, you're talking of, rather than go this, you go this way with one controller here and another controller here, or you could go even this way, where you have one controller each for the regenerator and for the reactor. Now, the moment you do this, what happens is this is one large multivariable controller, this is one large multivariable controller, and because of this presence of recycle, whatever decisions you make here will affect the operation of this, and because of this recycle here, whatever decisions you make here also will affect the reactor. And so in general, if I have to show you this, there might be 3, for example, multivariable or 4 multivariable controllers, and there can be different levels of interaction between them. And particularly true in large power systems, for example, where there are grids that operate with grid subsystems that are operating with their own controllers, but whatever decisions they make, that might affect the other power grid. Or likewise, in water distribution networks, when you dose disinfectants, whatever decisions you make in one centralized subsystem or one subsystem will actually affect maybe another subsystem, because the water flowing water is flowing into that subsystem as well. So the extent of interaction needs to be assessed. Okay. Now, if you look at the controllers, maybe a decade and a half ago, they would go for the centralized because that's the safest and that's the most optimal. Okay, not safest, that's the most optimal. Okay, but what happens is that if that centralized controller fails, then the problem is that everything will go for a toss. Okay, so what with advances in computing infrastructure and the possibility of distribution or decomposition, what the increasing preference has been to have decentralized structures like this. Reactor has its own MVC, regenerator has its own MVC and so on, but then also allow for a communication between them, a coordination or a communication between them, where each controller receives a plan of the other nodes, and based on the interacting dynamics, the node decides on its move towards optimizing the centralized cost. You will still be optimizing a centralized cost, but you will essentially be doing that based on the interactions that each node has with respect to all others. Okay? Now, this is something that is coming up as as a preferred control architecture for large scale systems. And to be able to do that, in fact, in the recent international conference on advances in computing in control and optimization held in IIT Madras in March, one of the researchers presented a highly networked system, and he said that critical to the performance of that highly networked system is, of course, partitioning. But what's more important is when you partition it, you want to make sure that you represent the interactions very, very accurately so that you can achieve coordination amongst them. Okay, it was Paul Vandenhoff who presented this analysis. So if you break that down, the problem comes up to something like this: that given multivariable controllers, in this case, I'm just showing you two. You know, the problem comes down to be able to detect in which channels interaction exists. It's pretty much similar to in which channels the mismatch exists, but slightly a different problem. You want to develop a characterization of in which channels the interaction exists, and then be able to facilitate or use those interactions in your controller strategy to accommodate those interactions. Now, what I show you here is one large multivariable controller, a second large multivariable controller, and amongst them, you can see two signals, U1 and U2. Okay. Now, let's pretend that both U1 and U2 are actually affecting Y3. Okay. In practice, the case could be that only U1 is affecting Y3 and U2 is not. Okay. Now, if I want to assess the presence of interaction, whether U1 is interacting with Y3 and U2 is also interacting with Y3, what I could do is I could do a simple correlation analysis between U1 and Y3 and U2 and Y3 and try to establish whether GD1 is finite or GD2 is finite, or one of them is zero. Okay. But as I said earlier, since U1 and U2 emanate from the same multivariable controller, they are correlated amongst themselves. And so when you test the correlation between U1 and Y3 and U2 and Y3, although the interaction exists only in U1, the correlation analysis will also show that the interaction exists with respect to U2 simply because U1 and U2 are correlated among them. And so here also the use of partial correlation analysis proves quite helpful in being able to isolate the channels in which the interaction exists. And then once you in closed loop, if you can collect these signals, you can identify the interacting dynamics and then go ahead with your controller scheme. So I'll skip this because I already talked about it. I'll not. You can look at this case study later. I'll go to the other aspect of control loop performance degradation, which is time varying disturbances. So just like interactions, when I have disturbances, they can also generate or degrade the measured performance index. So what you want to be able to do is look at possible reconfigurations in your control loop. And here, what I'm showing you is two control structures, which is reconfiguration. What is this reconfiguration about? This is a packed bed reactor where I have an analysis of the output. This packed bed reactor is critically dependent on this temperature, the feed temperature. This feed temperature is achieved by a certain amount of preheat of the feed. Okay. So if this is not sufficient, then what will happen is, please give me a minute. So if this is not adequate, If this preheat is not adequate, this quality will suffer. And so the normal control loop is just this one, where the output is analyzed and the extent of preheat is changed. Okay. Now, there is a second more impactful reconfiguration that says that you take this signal and let it set a target to the temperature controller, which measures temperature at the input and appropriately adjusts the preheat. Okay. So this is the regular feedback. This is cascade control. So it is in a sense a type of reconfiguration. Okay. So we are looking at this reconfiguration. Yeah. The question is, it involves a significant amount of money. You have to invest in a controller, you have to invest in a sensor. So you want to be able to assess the benefit of this upgrade. Is it really impactful to do this? And that's where control loop performance assessment can help by looking at the two structures. This is a single loop, single feedback loop. This is the cascade loop for the same system. And the question that you ask here is, can cascade control really help in reducing the variance? Okay. So this is tested by a simple example here, where some transfer functions are assumed for the primary process, for the secondary process, as well as for the noise transfer functions. Okay. And then a PI controller that maximizes the CLP is installed. And when this is done, the total variances that are seen in Y1 are these 12.89. But what you could also do is you could decompose the variances. You could decompose the variances into single feedback loop plus cascade, which gives you a variance reduction of 28.8%. Additional SFB component can give you 31.2%. The noise variances give you these. Okay. If you look at this, component 1B and component 2B contribute a total of 65% of the total variance in Y1. What is 1B? Additional SFB component resulting from the cascade. What is 2B? Noise variances. Together, these contribute 65% of the variance. So if you are able to reduce by bringing in this aspect, you can reduce this total variance, and so cascade control will prove beneficial. So, what you're trying to say here is that you are assessing the performance between these two as far as Y1 is concerned, and trying to make a case that yes, if I implement cascade control, I am able to get a reduction in at least this part of the noise. Of course, is always there, but this part I can reduce further, and so cascade control will improve. So with PI and P cascade control, PI in the outer loop, P in the inner loop, the overall variance components indeed were reduced, and therefore the cascade augmentation, the reconfiguration of the control loop with cascade augmentation is found to be helpful. Now one could do a similar analysis to check if feed forward control could help, and so on. But all of this is possible. You want to make sure that you analyze this based on routine data. So going back here, what we are saying is time varying disturbances. If there are time varying disturbances, is there a case for a controller reconfiguration that will reduce your total variance and therefore help you to go as close to the benchmark as possible? Okay, so that is another place where this kind of a variance analysis and control loop performance assessment would help. Now, how do you remedy control loop performances? You can, for example, do a simple inspection, maintenance of the control loop. This is anyway done. Loop retuning, we saw that in one case for the nitric acid plant. You saw it in the second case when you had detection of interactions and identifying NPM, the model plan mismatch. You could look at controller reconfiguration based on variance decomposition. We saw that for the cascade control and making projecting an assessment of improvement in because of the reconfiguration. And of course, re-identification of the dynamic model itself under closed loop is something that one could use when you're doing. Now, tools for performance assessment, there are a whole bunch of them. time delay determination methods in case time delay changes, methods for whitening time series, because eventually when you're doing variance analysis, you want to be able to estimate the minimum variance benchmark that requires. I didn't spend time on the theoretical analysis of how do you estimate the minimum variance benchmark, but that is based on whitening time series. Autoregressive time series modeling is something that you would need to understand. These two methods you would need to understand. Closed loop methods you need to understand. Spectral analysis and higher order statistics is something that you need to understand. Okay? So I think I'll just pause here. I'll take some questions and then make some summarizing remarks. Questions up to this point? Is it clear that is the compelling reason for going to partial correlations versus regular correlations clear to all of you? The reason why you want to go for a partial correlations is because when you're testing a correlation, especially when there are multivariable signals involved, the correlation may show up even when it does not exist because of the correlation amongst the causal variables that you are trying to test the correlation against. So to prevent that spurious correlation from showing up, you want to be able to use partial correlations and detect unambiguously where the correlations are actually existing and where you need attention. Any other questions, please? Okay. What I'll do is I'll proceed further and make some summarizing remarks. So here, control loop performance assessment. Maybe I should, if I have the slides here. Yeah. So yeah. Yes, please. Pradeep, please.
No, sir, ये कह रहे थे all thing is clear. So nice presentation.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. So I'll just make some summarizing remarks. If you can kindly mute, I think I'm getting a feedback here. So control loop performance assessment doesn't require extensive plant or any additional plant test. It works with routine operating data, run automatically in the background, generate health indices on a scale of 0 to 1. It can detect bad or underperforming loops. Relatively low error rates of detection because the methodology is based on cumulative indices. If it is based on point indices, then the error rates could be high with false alarms and the like. But here, the error rates false alarms will be low because you're using cumulative indices. They can help to diagnose loops that are underperforming and point to potential causes. And then, of course, diagnostics to the user. I'll just spend maybe 5 minutes on this minimum variance benchmark. Okay. So what is this minimum variance benchmark? Minimum variance benchmark is a benchmark that is a theoretical benchmark, just pretty much like the Carnot engine, thermodynamic efficiency. Remember, if those of you who are can recall thermodynamics, the theoretical efficiency of a engine is 1 minus the source temperature to the sink temperature, right? And what you want to be able to do is try to reach that Carnot efficiency as closely as possible. You can never reach it, you can only approach it. Okay, that's a theoretical benchmark. Just like that, for control loop performance, the minimum variance benchmark is one such performance. You can approach it, but you can never reach it. If you're lucky, occasionally you can reach it. Okay? Now, how is this minimum variance benchmark developed? It turns out that it's also developed based on the same routine operating data, but based on whitening. So what is done is This is the feedback controller that's assumed to be minimum variance. This is the plant with a certain amount of delay. These are the disturbances. And what is done is you are basically trying to see a ratio of two areas under the curve. One area is A, which is the invariant to feedback controller, because this is the delay. In any controller, let me go back here. When I have a control action initiated here, the impact of that is seen in the output only after the delay time because of the presence of this delay. Okay, so there is at least that much variation that no matter, even if I have a minimum variance controller, I cannot reduce that variation. So the one that is there in blue is something that I have to just live with. It's invariant to the type of feedback controller. Okay, and then there is another area that is because the feedback controller is inefficient, not designed well, and the like. Okay, what I want to be able to do is generate a ratio which is A upon A plus B. But there is nothing I can do about this area. That area plus what I can do to minimize this area, which is B, A upon A plus B. The moment B goes to 0, eta goes to 1. Right? You agree? When B goes to 0. So our effort should be all on this B, because you want to make sure that the controller is performing in a peak manner. So we want to quantify what is this variance. We want to quantify this variance. And so that is done by a series of whitening exercises, which in the time that I have, I cannot explain. But basically what is done is, each of these impulse response coefficients are estimated, and the squared values of those go in the numerator, and the summation of all the F's go in the denominator, and that ratio becomes a performance index. I apologize for these vague symbols that have come here, but I'll correct them before I post. So this ratio is basically from routine operating data. And so now going further, how, I don't know what has happened here. A lot of garbage has come in. But let me just quickly show you that see, this is where the ratio come in. The minimum variance is basically the sum of all the impulse response coefficients, which is the ratio. And these ratios are essentially established using correlation analysis or autocorrelation analysis. So this is a little bit of a theory, which in the time, given time, I'm unable to cover. But all that I'm trying to tell you here is that the minimum variance benchmark is essentially established from the routine operating data itself. It doesn't require an explicit model. And that routine operational data can be filtered through various ways. And therefore, the whitening filter, the tools that I mentioned earlier, what tools are required, the methods for whitening time series, this is one approach, tool that is required for determining the minimum variance benchmark, and that is used to whiten the time series. Okay. I will correct this appendix slide when I post this, but I don't know why this has happened. And partial correlation analysis also, here is an example of the partial correlation coefficient. Suppose I have y, x1, x2, xn that affect y. Okay, I want to check whether x2 affects y or not. Okay, so what I do is I can do small correlation problems between y and x1, y and x2, y and x3, and y and xn. But that alone is, I'll come back to your question, Nirmala Devi. Y, x1, y, x2, y, x3, I can do a regular correlation. But if x1 and x2 themselves are correlated, then that approach will not work. I will have to, if all x's are correlated, that will not work. I'll have to do a partial correlation analysis, which is basically deflating the correlation where it exists in the causal variables, deflating that into some error residuals, and then test the correlation between the error residuals and y. Ex and Ey is what you will test for the partial correlation. So this is there in the slides. You can look at it, and yeah, I think I'll stop here because they're closer to the hour. But let me answer Dr. Nirmala Devi's question. Is there any online free toolbox for this performance modeling or selecting best benchmark models? Yes, there is a MATLAB toolbox on control loop performance assessment. I think this is from the University of Alberta. You can look at Professor Biao Huang's webpage, or I think it's also also easily accessible via Google search. There is a CLP, a control loop performance assessment toolbox in MATLAB that is available, which you can download. But let me also mention here that please don't use the toolbox without understanding this concept, because otherwise, you'll derive incorrect interpretations from those. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll pause for any questions, but I'll also stop the recording here.